So in the last video, we saw how to use for loops, but for loops are not the only way to use loops in Python. The other common way of using them is called while loops. So let's see what it looks like. First of all, let's recap one of the things we did in the last video. We had total being equal to 0, and then we had for I in range 1, 5, colon, 4 spaces, total plus equals I, and then print total. What this block did was it added up all the numbers through all the integers through 1 through 5, not including 5, to total, and then we printed that number. And that number is 10 because 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 is 10. So can we do the same thing with a while loop? The answer is yes. Let's see what that looks like. Let's first initialize a new variable called total2 to be 0. And then we're going to write while j is less than 5, do the following. And actually the while loop doesn't initialize the index for us, j for us, so we'll need to initialize it explicitly ourselves. So we're going to write j equals 1 before we go into the while loop. And then while j is less than 5, do the following, which is 4 spaces of course, total2 plus equals j, add j to the total2 variable, and then j plus equals 1. So add 1 to j. And then after the while loop, we're going to print total2. So what this block says is when we get to the while loop, check if j is less than 5. And since it's true, I mean 1 is of course less than 5, do the following, total2 plus equals j, add j to total, and then add 1 to j. So j will become 2, and at that point, we'll go back to the beginning of the loop again. And we're going to check if j is less than 5 still. And of course, 2 is less than 5, so we'll go through that again. And once j is 4, we'll say add 1 to j, and j will become 5. And when we go back here, we'll stop the loop right here, and then we'll break out of it because j is no longer less than 5, and then we'll print total2. So this block pretty much does exactly the same thing as what the previous block does. So let's see if it works, and it does. We printed 10, which is the sum of 1, 2, 3, and 4. So why would we want to use while loops instead of for loops? Well, it depends on the situation, but one situation where it's useful is when you don't know how many loops you need beforehand. So I'm going to give you an example of that. Let's say you're given this list, given underscore list, which is 5, 4, 4, 3, 1, minus 2, minus 3, and minus 5. And let's say you don't necessarily know the contents of this list beforehand, but you know that this list is sorted in a descending order. So that means the largest number comes first in this list, and when you go right, you know that the numbers always go down or stay the same. So 4 is less than 5, and 4 is less than or equal to 4, and so on. And let's say you want to find the sum of only the positive numbers in this list. How can we do that? Well, what we want to do is we want to run some kind of loops so that we can iterate over elements, but only the positive ones. So that way we don't know how many loops we need to find the sum of only the positive numbers. In a situation like this, for loops can be really useful. So let's see what that looks like by first defining total3 to 0, and then the index I to 0 as well. And then we're going to write a while loop here with while given underscore list, square brackets I, is greater than 0. Total3 plus equals given lists, square brackets I, and then I plus equals 1. So what we are saying here is first check the current element in given lists. So since I will start at 0, the first current element of given list will be the first element, which is 5. While this element is greater than 0, do the following. First, add the current element, given list square brackets I, to total3, and then increment I by 1. So that means just go to the next item. If we're examining this current item here, I would be 0. So we're saying let's go to the next item, which is index 1. So when I is equal to 1, given list square brackets 1 would be the second item right here, 4, and that's greater than 0. So we're going to add that to total 3, and then we're going to go to the next item. And we're going to keep doing that until we're right here, whose index is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And at that point, given list square brackets 5 would be -2, which is not greater than 0. So we'll break out of the while loop. After that, we can print total 3 and see if we get the correct answer. And the correct answer is the sum of all of these numbers, 5 plus 4 plus 4 plus 3 plus 1, which is 9, 13, 16, 17. So let's see if we can get that. And we did. So this little method works, but only if the given list contains at least one non-positive number. So what would happen if this given list only had positive numbers? For example, 5, 4, 4, 3, and 1. Let's see what happens by running this cell. Oops, it actually gave us an error called index error. And it says index error, list index out of range. And it actually makes sense because when I is equal to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, we go through this list because given list square brackets 4, which is 1, is greater than 0. And then we go to this point, I plus equals 1, and I will be 5. And then we'll check here, is given list square brackets 5 greater than 0? But when we ask Python what's at index 5 of given lists, it's gonna give us an error because nothing exists at index 5. So we'll need to fix it by adding an additional condition to the while loop by saying while I is less than 5 and given list square brackets I is greater than 0. And actually, instead of saying 5 explicitly, we could also say len of given lists, which means the length of given list. And note here that len is another predefined function in Python. And then once we run this cell, this should work now. Oops, I didn't spell it correctly, given lists. So I'm gonna write given list again. And then let's run this cell. And it works now. Okay, now let's create a new list, given list 2, which has both positive numbers and negative numbers. And you might ask, given this list, can we add up all the positive numbers using a for loop instead of a while loop? The answer is yes, we can. Let's see how that works. So we're going to define total 4 to be 0. And then we're going to write for element in given lists 2 colon total 4 plus equals element, and then print element. So currently, of course, what this block does is this is going to add up all the elements in given lists 2 to total 4. So that will include both positive numbers and negative numbers. What if we wanted to break out of the loop as soon as we see a negative number? We can do that with the break statement. So we're going to write here, if the current element is less than or equal to 0, colon, then break out of this loop. So how this works is this is going to add up the elements up to right here, 1. And 1 is not less than or equal to 0, so we're not going to break. And we're going to add 1 to total 4. And after that, element will become -2. And at that point, element is of course less than or equal to 0. So we'll break out of the for loop. So that way we won't check any elements after that, and we're not going to add any of the negative numbers to total 4. So with this method, we should print total 4 instead. And once we print total 4, we should see 17, which is the sum of all the positive numbers, of course. And we see exactly that. And actually, this break statement works in while loops exactly the same way. So let's see how that works by solving the same problem with the same list, given list 2. We're going to first define total 5 to 0. and then we're gonna write a while loop saying while something, and this something will be a statement that's always true. So it could be something like while 1 is less than 2. It's kind of silly, but this statement is always true, right? Because 1 is always less than 2. And then once we meet a certain condition, we'll break out of the while loop with the break statement. And actually, instead of writing this silly statement, 1 less than 2, you can just write true, because true is always true. And note that true here has the T capitalized. So we're gonna write while true, and then before this while loop, we're going to define I to be 0. This is going to be the index that we're going to use. And in this while loop, we're gonna write total 5 plus equals given list square brackets I. So that says add the current element, and this should be given list 2. Add the current element in given list 2 to total 5, and then increment I by I plus equals 1. And if the next item, if given list square brackets I is less than or equal to 0, then break out of this loop. And here I'm just assuming that this given list has at least one non-positive number. So what's going to happen with this block is I will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And as soon as I is 4, we're going to add given list square brackets 4, which is 1, to total 5. And then I will be 5 after this line. And because given list square brackets 5 is minus 2, that's of course less than or equal to 0, we're going to break out of this while loop. And after that, we're going to print total 5, and that should give us 17 if we didn't make any mistake. Actually, I made a mistake here. Given list, this should be given list 2 because we're just looking at given list 2, and this should fix everything, and it did. We get 17. And here's a little problem to practice what you learned in this video. Let's say you're given this list, given list 3, and you don't necessarily know the contents of this list beforehand, but you know that the elements in this list are sorted in a descending order. So of course that means when you go right, the numbers always go down or stay the same. Can you find the sum of all the negative numbers instead of all the positive numbers? I would use a while loop here, but there is a way to do it with a for loop as well. Okay, and as usual, if you want to download the file I created through this video, just go to csdojo.io/python6, and make sure to follow CS Dojo on Facebook if you haven't yet, because this is where I announce my live streams and stuff. Okay, I'll see you guys in the next video.